What's up, guys? This week I thought we would use everything that we've learned the last few weeks with drawing out facial features and drawing a proportional face to draw a portrait from start to finish. I've chosen a portrait of Pablo Picasso based off a photo that I've found. I'm going to show you how you can take a photograph and use those proportional guidelines that we talked about that first week to plan out the face from start to finish. So you can see here the side by side of the portrait with the guidelines over that portrait, and then I take away the portrait altogether so you're just left with the guidelines. Notice with the guidelines we start with the circle and the U, but because in the portrait the face is slightly turned, those middle lines and the eye line are slanted and over to the left if you're looking at them. So I'm using those guidelines that I first put on that portrait to draw out everything based off of the first step-by-step proportional guidelines that we talked about. So you can see me here spacing in where the eyes are going to go, and I'll space in where the nose and the mouth are going to go as well. So you can see when I put the photograph with the guidelines up how you can plan these features out. You want to think of the face as a whole instead of starting with one particular feature over another. So you've seen me plan everything out here with the guidelines, and now I'm going in and I'm using those step-by-step tools that we talked about to roughly draw in the features. Keep these first few lines and this first drawing really light so you can go back and change things if you need to. This is just to get everything planned out accordingly and proportionately on the face before you go in with any details or any values. So let me also note that you can see that there's a gray background on my page. This is something fun you can try, especially if you're using charcoal. Instead of starting with the white of the page, I am starting with a gray background that I use by smudging charcoal all over the paper. I like to do this because you can go back and add highlights really easily by erasing away. You already have some middle values on there, so it adds a little bit more to the portrait. If you're drawing this on the iPad, you can put a gray background down first instead of starting with a white background. If you're using pencil, you want to use a light H pencil first to get a gray value that's not too dark when you start off. So now I'm still going in and I'm roughly sketching out the features. I'm using some of those tools that we've talked about the last few weeks to draw them out proportionally. I want to get everything drawn out first for the most part on the face before I go back with any details or really dark values or anything, just so I have everything planned out and everything is nice and proportional before you go in and start adding the values. So also notice when we first started drawing a proportional face, it was a straight view of the face. This one's slightly turned so you can see the angle has changed. You can see the space between one side of the face versus the other side is different. Here it is with the side-by-side comparison to the photo. If you're drawing from a photo, you want to continually look at that reference. If you're drawing from a mirror, you want to continually look at your reference in the mirror as well. You want to be looking at your reference almost more than you're looking at your drawing, especially in this stage because you want to get everything drawn out proportionally. So now that I have everything drawn out to scale into proportion, I'm going to go in and start using some of those value techniques and some of the shading techniques that we've talked about with the face. So when I first start shading in and putting in values, I'm looking at big areas of middle grays, and I'm also looking at some of the darkest areas first. And that's what you can see me going in here and doing. Some of the areas around the eyes, around the nostril, those darkest values are the ones that I'm starting in first. And I'm using that darker charcoal now instead of the vine charcoal to really make those stand out. So as you see me still building up values, building up details and shadows on the face, I'll talk a little bit about Picasso, the artist. Obviously one of the most influential artists of the 20th century. If you were in any of my upper division art courses, you probably remember us talking about him, discussing some of his artwork, a little bit about his history, and comparing him to some of the other artists. As we go through, I'll show a few of his pieces here, some of his most influential artworks, how he worked in those different periods. Here's his probably most influential piece is Guernica, an actual photo of him working on that piece. He obviously broke from the classical style of art and really pushed the limits of portrait work, as you see there, not really going off of those traditional guidelines and proportional depictions of the face. So shifting back over to talking about the drawing, you see me here putting in highlights, and I'm actually doing that using my kneaded eraser. I'm just erasing away some of those initial layers of that light charcoal that I had down. We're building up highlights just like we were building up those shadows. We're constructing, we're sculpting that face. I'm going back and forth between that and my reference to make sure I haven't changed up any proportions or moved any features around where they don't need to be. Remember, anytime there's a change of direction, there needs to be a change of value, so I'm double checking that as well and getting that realistic look. And I've put a couple images of some Picasso drawing as well, since we've been talking so much about drawing the face and the features. You can see how his style evolved and how he pushed the limits and started doing some more radical styles in his drawing. He pushed those proportional guidelines to whole new limits and really created his own type of style of portrait work. But even with those radical styles, it's important to note that he started off classically trained as an artist. He knew the tools and the skills you needed to draw realistically. He knew the proportions of the face. He has one of my favorite quotes. He says, "You have to learn the rules like a professional so you can break them like an artist." So he knew proportion, he knew all these tools before he got into those radical, more abstract styles. So going back over to the drawing, you see me here, I'm defining more highlights. I'm actually using the eraser on a pencil I have to get some more detailed highlights, just so I can be a little bit more accurate. I'm going around the wrinkles in the face. I'm going around in the hair, adding little details there. Still jumping around the whole entire face, not focusing in primarily on one spot. You can see you want to keep looking at the portrait as a whole. You don't want to focus in on one particular area. You want to make sure that it's cohesive and it's working all the way around instead of in just one specific spot. Keep looking around, keep looking at all these little areas. I'm going in and I'm adding little bits of texture, little details here and there to push it even more realistically. So I'm using basically the same materials that I have in all the other facial feature step-by-step guides. It's the vine charcoal, which would be the light charcoal. It's also what I put down as a base in the very beginning to put that gray down. I'm using the compressed charcoal stick for the darker shadow areas and a kneaded eraser to erase away highlights and just blending out with my hand. I also use a pencil eraser to get a little bit more detailed highlights as well. So just a few things to remember as I'm finishing up the portrait here. Whether you're working from a mirror, whether you're working from a photograph, you want to constantly be looking at that image over and over and over again, so you're double checking the entire face. Remember, anytime there's a change of direction in the face, there needs to be a change of value as well. You need good middle values, you need good highlights, and you need good shadows. So use all those lessons we've talked about the last few weeks, draw your guidelines, build up your features, and draw out your realistic portrait.